weeks after a plea deal fell apart. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy fights for his leadership post after a fellow Republican files a motion for his removal, and a break in the case reunites a missing 9-year-old with her parents just days after her kidnapping in upstate New York. Later this hour, former President Donald Trump returns to a New York courtroom for the second day of testimony in his fraud civil trial. How this case is having a direct impact on his 2024 race for the White House. And one of the nation's largest health system braces for a possible strike that could impact 13 million patients. We'll look at the issues and when the walkouts could begin at Kaiser Permanente. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to 3 felony charges stemming from his purchase of a firearm in 2018 while he was a drug user. The president's son was arraigned in federal court in Delaware earlier today. He was indicted on the charges after a plea deal involving a separate tax case fell apart, as you might remember, earlier this year. He's charged with both lying about his use of narcotics while buying a gun and possessing a gun while using narcotics. Attorneys for Hunter Biden have slammed the charges as politically motivated. If convicted, Hunter Biden faces up to 25 years in prison and fines of up to $750,000. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now from outside the courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware. Catherine, you've been following this story from the start, breaking much news too. Please walk us through what happened in court today.
Well, Lilia, good to be with you. This was a little bit of history that unfolded in the courthouse behind me, in the courtroom, on the second floor. The president's son facing these felony gun charges. And as Hunter Biden entered that courtroom, he passed by me not more than 5 feet away. And there really was a sense of sort of nervous energies. He had a nervous smile as he entered that courtroom and a real sense of apprehension. A lot of this hearing was very standard. The judge in this case summarized the charges that he faces, summarizes the potential penalties if he is convicted, which, as you noted, could be extremely serious, and also that he has a right to remain silent. And to each of these, he spoke in a soft but strong voice, "Yes, Your Honor." The plea was entered by his attorney, Abby Lowell. He told the court Mr. Biden pleads not guilty to the 3 charges. What stands out to me, Lilia, is that it was only 2 months ago that Hunter Biden entered the same courthouse with this sense of real optimism, very upbeat that he was going to put his legal troubles behind him. But with today's arraignment, legal experts have said to CBS News that his situation is very precarious, not only on the gun charges, but the possibility that additional charges could be brought on potential tax violations or even violations of foreign lobbying laws, either in California or Washington, D.C., Lilia.
I see. So those charges haven't come yet. I'm curious about something I was reading about the defense's perhaps strategy or argument that one of the charges is unconstitutional. Of course, I'm thinking of, somebody who is obviously a Democrat having a defense that might be, I don't know, on the side of the more gun or the against the gun or on the side of the gun lobby, rather. Bit confusing there, but I'm just thinking they're saying this is unconstitutional. I'm thinking of the pro-Second Amendment people liking this defense. Am I going too far and too convoluted into that? Can you explain that to us?
Sure. It's a very live question in the courts, and you're right, it is pretty complex. But if we strip away the politics, what's at the heart of the defense team's argument is that this charge, which bars a drug user from owning a weapon, in their view is unconstitutional and a violation of his Second Amendment rights. And the reason that's probably the strongest leading argument for the defense is that the Fifth Circuit recently ruled that this was unconstitutional, that restrictions that are placed on gun owners that were not in place when the Second Amendment became part of the Constitution, they are going too far, if you will. They go beyond what the founding fathers envisioned. For example, let's say someone is the subject of a domestic abuse restraining order, a domestic violence restraining order. Is it unconstitutional to block that person from owning a weapon? These are the live constitutional questions that are being litigated in the courts right now, including the Supreme Court. And this is one of the arguments Hunter Biden's legal team is making in an effort to dismiss this case.
Well, a convenient defense, even if it sides with the gun lobby. Could a plea deal be reached, or are we more likely to see this go to trial based on the severity of the charges?
It's always possible that there can be a meeting of the minds between the two sides. I think it's wise to look at this case as having two elements or being bifurcated. There is the felony gun charges here in Delaware, but if there are subsequent charges, they would be brought in another jurisdiction. It's possible that they could reach a settlement here, kind of wipe that and put it to bed, and then deal with any charges in the future. But it was also clear at that July plea hearing that there is a lot of distance between these two parties in terms of what they thought they had agreed to, protection from future criminal prosecution. And I would note the same judge in July, federal judge Mary Ellen Noreika, who asked very basic questions that led to the collapse of this plea deal, is also the judge who was assigned to the felony gun case. So I think that will be noteworthy as well.
All right. So more to come. Catherine Herridge, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The gentleman will state the form of his resolution.
Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. Resolved that the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives is hereby declared to be vacant.
Members of Congress are set to hold a vote today on whether to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz filed a rare motion to vacate on the House floor last night. Gaetz has criticized McCarthy for working with Democrats to pass a bipartisan legislation to fund the government. McCarthy responded earlier this morning to the charges, saying he's confident he'll maintain his role as Speaker. Listen.
If you throw a speaker out that has 99% of their conference, that kept government open and paid the troops, I think we're in a really bad place for how we're going to run Congress.
All right, CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us from Capitol Hill. Scott, what's going to happen next? How does this whole process play out?
I'll guarantee you one thing, and only one thing. We're going to see a sight we rarely have ever seen. There's going to be a motion at about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. House to start a process to potentially oust a U.S. House Speaker. How often has that happened in history? 0 times. It's never been successful. They're going to try it today. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's been among the, if not the, most ardent, vitriolic critic of Kevin McCarthy inside the Republican conference, brought this challenge last night. It's likely to manifest itself with a little bit of parliamentary inside baseball. There's likely to be a motion to table to begin the afternoon proceedings. What does that mean? A motion to table means to knock down Matt Gaetz's challenge to Kevin McCarthy, to get it off the table, keep McCarthy in place. But oh, does he have some challenges ahead of him? Kevin McCarthy has already lost on this vote, likely at least 5 Republicans. That's all that Matt Gaetz needs to put McCarthy in jeopardy, because it appears Democrats are going to be unified against McCarthy as well. They have no love lost for Kevin McCarthy. They have any number of concerns and grievances with him. So if Matt Gaetz and his conservative defectors join all Democrats in this vote, that motion to table will not succeed. And at some point, either immediately after or soon thereafter, they move on to this vote to oust McCarthy. Either way, we're seeing history.
You know, you're saying Democrats seem to be unified against McCarthy. We had been talking about this yesterday on whether or not Matt Gaetz could be shooting himself on the foot by forcing McCarthy to maybe promise something to the Democrats to get them on board to keep him on his seat. Is that likely to happen? Is there something he can give Democrats that will secure their votes?
We asked Speaker McCarthy that question today. He says he has made no deals with Democrats to secure their votes. That's politically perilous for him to do so. If he were to cut a power arrangement with Democrats, he'd have even more defectors inside his own conference seeking to challenge him. Democrats emphasized as they walked out of a late morning meeting that they're going to be unified. They're going to vote with one voice, which is difficult for any political party in Congress to do because there's so many diverse interests. Whether that's a unified voice against Kevin McCarthy or for some third path that gets them some concessions remains to be seen. But they want to emphasize that they're unified as Republicans are fractured. It really is quite a backdrop for a nearly unprecedented vote today.
I mean, a lot of unprecedented moments in our political system at this time. I'm wondering, and I remember it took forever to get him approved, and this was always on the table. Matt Gaetz has been threatening about this. If the motion is tabled, can he just keep bringing it up, again, over and over, and the speaker just continues to have that weakened position in Congress?
Yes, he can, and he says yes, he will. And I asked Speaker McCarthy if he expects Matt Gaetz to try this again if he fails today, and Speaker McCarthy told me, yes, I do. This is going to be a drumbeat over the coming days. There are small administrative things that could throw a vote off, like what's the head count? Are there any Democrats absent because they have a COVID isolation or they have a family emergency? That could change the outcome of a vote today. But if Matt Gaetz brings this challenge again tomorrow, the head count may restore itself. And so Kevin McCarthy faces an ultimate decision from the full U.S. House. So, yeah, this will repeat itself. And at a sensitive moment, Lilia, I mean, they're 45 days away from another government shutdown. Acrimony and palace intrigue doesn't help.
That's right. Scott McFarland, thank you. Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas is back on Capitol Hill after being the victim of a carjacking last night. He says he was parking his car in southwest Washington, D.C., about 1 mile from the Capitol when it happened.
Came out of nowhere and they pointed guns at me. I do have a black belt, but I recognize when you got three guns. I looked at one with a gun, another with a gun, a third one behind me. So they said they wanted my car. I said, sure, you got to keep calm in those situations.
Always good advice. Cuellar says he was not hurt. His car and all of his belongings have already been recovered and were returned to him by the police. No arrests have been made so far.
Still pretty overwhelming because all of us feared the worst.
That was New York Governor Kathy Hochul reacting to a missing 9-year-old girl who was found safe and returned to her family. Charlotte Senna disappeared in a state park near Albany on Saturday. The man accused in her disappearance, 46-year-old Craig Ross Jr., is now behind bars facing kidnapping charges. Charlotte's family released a statement saying, quote, "We are thrilled that she's home and we understand that the outcome is not what every family gets." For more on this story, let's bring in former FBI agent and attorney Catherine Schweit. Catherine, always great to see you and get your insights on just how this all plays out. Charlotte's family acknowledged this is not an outcome that many families see. I mean, I was shocked to hear about how it all played out. So happy that she is safe. Tell us, how rare is this to have this kind of positive outcome within those 48 hours?
Well, a lot of kids go missing. Hundreds of thousands of kids go missing every year, but many of them are parental kidnappings. Many of them are children who walk away, teens who leave their homes and are reported missing. These kinds of circumstances, they are very rare to have a child who is abducted, and especially under the age of 12, and disappears like this. And it's what we would call a true kidnapping in the FBI.
A true kidnapping. So what went right in this case compared to other cases? I'm assuming the fact that this person went and dropped a note at her parents' house plays a role in, how easy or difficult it is to catch someone like that.
Sure. Any investigation is a lot of, it's a lot of happenstance, a lot of luck, right? You got the note, we had people, but I think it's good police work. What you saw is good police work. Patience, urgency. There's so many important things. One of them is getting, as soon as you think a child is missing, getting right to law enforcement, getting right to the FBI who works these cases when there's a minor involved, a child that young. And then also you saw the letter, the note was at the parents' house, but the parents were at the campgrounds, right? Mm-hmm. It's the idea that you've got to blanket all the areas all at once. Right. And they were quick and smart to get there and get to the home and be able to pull the note and get the prints checked right away on it. That's good police work.
This case, within the couple of days since Charlotte went missing, became a national story. There was a lot of awareness around it. How important was that to solving it, and is that in general?
you know, a lot of kidnappings you might never hear about. You know, I will say, if you want some details on it tonight, on CBS, that debuts FBI True, and
Right.
they're telling the story of the boy in the bunker. So down in Alabama, the child who was abducted off of his school bus. And it's very unusual to have these kind of cases happen. But when you do, you want everybody to know that child is missing, because anybody can have a piece of information that'll count.
What kind of advice can you give parents to prevent something like this happening? I mean, it seems obvious as I ask it, but you know, you also want children to be able to enjoy, to be out there, to play with friends, to ride their bicycle. Is there something else that they can do so their children can live a pretty normal life?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that these are crimes of opportunity, and people who plan kidnappings, they are looking for that one child. They might have observed that child walk a route before. I worked a kidnapping where a child was abducted off a bus who walked 2 houses to their home, and the man at the house next to the bus stop kidnapped the child and killed him. And, you know, so it's really opportunities where somebody chooses, especially a child, they're looking for somebody who you don't have eyes on them. And so for a parent, you know, your child can play in the field, but your child should never be out of your sight. That's just a safety factor that should apply in every instance.
And just very quickly, because I mean, I've been talking to others here in the building, and we all seem to feel like this is a story that it was more common in the 80s, or maybe because I was a child in the 80s or in the early 90s, you would hear about it more. But is it very uncommon that children get kidnapped in this way nowadays, or am I wrong?
Well, I think 2 things, right? This is a kidnapping and a kidnapping for ransom. Kidnappings for ransom are pretty rare. You know, there's a dozen or so a year where somebody's putting out a kidnapping note. What we heard and dealt with a lot in the 80s, and I recall that, and I was actually raising kids, you know, in that time period. So what we dealt with a lot in the 80s were children who were being snagged out of malls and snagged off of the streets, physically assaulted, and then dropped someplace. So a panicked parent and neighborhood looking for a child, and then the child, you know, maybe has disappeared from the back of a Sears store and, you know, been carried out by somebody. So I think that in the 80s, I think there was just a lot of coverage of it, truthfully. There are so many children missing today, and there are so many people who, like these parents said, they recognize so many people who don't have this wonderful outcome.
Catherine Schweit, thank you for your wisdom always. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Donald Trump is back in a New York City courtroom for the 2nd day in a row. What we are expecting to hear in his civil fraud trial, and how his comments outside of the court could impact the outcome. Plus, Late Night is back. We'll recap how Stephen Colbert celebrated his return to air after the writer's strike finally came to an end.
The picket lines, my writers got fresh air and sunshine, and they do not care for that.
Donald Trump is back in a New York City courtroom for the 2nd day of his civil fraud trial. The former president is facing allegations of inflating his net worth along with the value of his properties in order to receive business benefits. Trump continued his attacks on New York State Attorney General Letitia James for what he is calling a sham case before heading into the courtroom. Let's listen.
This case should be dismissed. This is not a case. And she should probably be dismissed also, because she's terrible and grossly incompetent, as I've said.
CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from outside the court. Robert, Trump appears to be litigating this case inside and out of the courtroom. We've heard judges tell him to do the opposite of that in his criminal cases. This is different. How does his behavior today compare to yesterday's hearing, and could this affect the case at all?
Good to be with you from outside the courthouse. I just spent the last few hours inside the courtroom watching former President Donald Trump as day 2 of this civil trial unfolded. And while former President Trump made those statements before he entered the courtroom during a break in the proceedings, the notable thing today to me as a reporter was the quiet, the silence from the Trump lawyers, Trump himself inside the room, because this is a trial that's playing out in the courtroom. And while there's drama outside and harsh rhetoric outside of it. Inside, you have to play by the rules, and they're listening as the government lays out its case about how they believe Trump committed fraud across the board. And most of today was actually listening to a witness named Donald Bender, an accountant who worked with Mazars, an accountant's firm, to look at the Trump organization's financial books. And so this is kind of a dry day, too, if you put aside what Trump was saying outside to the cameras.
So I understand that former President Trump is expected to leave New York this afternoon. Is he going to be expected in court at any other time in the near future?
It's always possible, but Trump's presence here today and yesterday was entirely voluntary. He didn't need to be here. He wanted to be here, according to people close to him. The Trump organization, which is under scrutiny here and has been accused of fraud, and the judges said it had committed fraud across the board and how it laid out its financial statements and secured loans. This is an organization, a company, that is so close to Trump's persona politically in the business world, and he is here to defend it at every turn. But these trials take months. The judge said yesterday at the opening of the trial this could go all the way to December, and so it's very unlikely, according to Trump's advisors, he's going to be here another day, most days, if at all. But he wanted to have a presence at least at the start, and knowing Trump, if there's a big witness coming, maybe his former fixer Michael Cohen, maybe somebody else, he might show up.
How does this all play politically speaking? We know that other cases in the past have brought him funding and popularity and help his campaign.
This is to be determined politically. He remains the front runner in the Republican presidential race, as you well know, and we've been covering for months. At the same time, so many of his rivals, they do sense an opening, not direct. They see it more as a bank shot. Maybe the weight of all of these legal challenges on the federal level, the city level here in New York with those hush money payments, now with the state attorney general and the civil lawsuit. If all of that becomes such a burden on Trump, maybe he starts to have a bit of a collapse politically, if not a full collapse, and that could create an opening for former Ambassador Nikki Haley or Senator Tim Scott, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. The list goes on. They're all looking for that opening, but they don't want to alienate Trump or his voters, because you know what happens when you draw his ire. He'll lash out at you.
Right. Well, maybe. We haven't seen that effect yet. Robert Costa, thank you.
Hello, xin chào tất cả anh em. Sau đây tôi sẽ giới thiệu cho anh em một cách và hướng dẫn cho anh em một cách để nuôi và chăm một chú gà chọi được khỏe và sung căng nhất có thể. Và sau đây là cách hướng dẫn của tôi, và anh em cùng tôi chiêm ngưỡng chú gà của tôi nhé. Và đây là mặt mũi, mỏ. Cái này người ta gọi là, tôi gọi là tía mật, chân trắng. Thường thường người ta kỵ gà bạch đầu trí, nhưng mà tôi thì chả kỵ cái móng nào, đá hay là được. Ở đây nó sẽ nhốt em nó vào bu. Và muốn chiến binh của mình khỏe mạnh nhất có thể là không thể nào thiếu phần thức ăn được. Thức ăn là một phần rất quan trọng. Sau đây tôi sẽ cho anh em hướng dẫn anh em cách để cho gà ăn không bị nấm họng hoặc là tiêu hóa. Đây. Thành phần chính là thóc. Thóc thì mùa đông chúng ta có thể ngâm qua đêm được. Mùa hè thì có thể chúng ta vo sạch ngâm 3 đến 50 phút thì có thể đổ ra phơi khô ráo nước và có thể ăn được. Đây. Đó, chúng ta cho vào nước này. Quay nước, đãi sạch hết trấu đi. Đãi sạch hết trấu đi. Đấy, vo sạch như thế, làm sạch như gạo mình ăn luôn. nó đi vo tầm 2 đến 3 lần. Tưởng như tôi nhà cho các chiến binh ăn xong là vo thì có thể vo được. Mình cứ căn bữa, mình vo từ sáng và mình cứ phát sạch như này. Đấy, làm từ sáng, xong là 30-40 phút sau. Thường là sẽ là sáng sớm, nhưng mà đây hôm nay tôi sáng tôi cho ăn hết rồi. Đây là tôi phải vo thêm và đợi một tí nữa thì là cho ăn. Làm như nào mình cứ cho ăn mình làm một lần cho ăn 2 bữa, sáng tối, xong đêm hôm sau hoặc là sáng sớm hôm sau mình dậy mình lại làm như thế. Đấy, cho nó sạch hết chấu đi rồi. Ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Đấy, ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Nước trong như này ngâm đây 3 đến 50 phút là có thể đổ ra phơi khô cho gà ăn được. Muốn con gà của mình mà sung khăng đỏ khỏe thì không thể thiếu được một lọ mồi cóc như này. Đấy, đây là mồi cóc tôi đặt của anh Trương Lê. Đây, có mỗi ngày thường bây giờ mùa nóng tôi cứ cho ăn mồi này, thì ngày nào mình phải cho ăn. Đấy, mồi này ngày nào mình cho ăn. Như con này thèm mồi, nó nhìn thấy mồi là nó rình ra để nó mổ luôn. Đấy, nó cứ tìm được ra để nó mổ. Đấy, mồi cho ăn ngày ăn 2-3 viên được, mỗi ngày ăn 2-3 viên. Sáng mình cho ăn thóc xong thì tầm độ 9-10 giờ mình cho ăn mồi kèm theo rau giá cà chua để con gà nó được bổ sung. Ăn mồi này thì có khả năng nó sẽ rất nóng, thì mình cho ăn thêm rau giá cà chua để cho nó hãm cái nóng ấy nó lại. Ăn mồi này thì gà cực kỳ sung căng đỏ khỏe, với cả nhanh vào cốt con gà. Đấy. Nhiều anh em nuôi gà những con gà tơ như này là đã lôi đi cứ thế thử túi bụi rồi, là không cho nó khô khén lông lá, là để nó thử sớm là con gà nó sẽ hỏng cốt sớm. Về sau là xương cốt nó bị như kiểu người anh thế, đấm nhiều vào một chỗ là nó đau. Thì đây con gà thì đánh nhiều vào là sẽ sau là nó sẽ giảm độ tải đi và lông lá nó sẽ bị hỏng. Trong khi đến lúc mà mình vần khai trận rồi, bọn cùng tuổi của mình nó mới vần ấy, thì lông lá chúng nó đẹp, chúng nó nhìn thấy mình thì bụi mù lên, là chúng nó sẽ bảo mình là gà già. Thế không nên. Đây như tôi thường tôi nuôi gà là 11 tháng, 11 đến 12 tháng tôi bắt đầu tôi mới cho mở mỏ. Tầm đấy lông lá các thứ là vào cốt hết rồi. Thì nói chung là tầm đấy nó chỉ có ăn với nó nuôi lực của nó thôi, không phải nuôi lông với cả không phải nở xương nở cốt nữa. Vần tầm đấy thì nó sẽ ra đòn ra lối hơn, và con gà mình chăm hàng ngày thì nó cũng sẽ khỏe hơn. Đấy. Con gà tơ theo anh em thì cách chăm như thế là đã đủ chưa? Nếu mà thiếu thốn cái gì hoặc là cần suy nghĩ kinh nghiệm gì thì anh em có thể chia sẻ vào đây, tôi có thể tôi học theo anh em, tại vì tôi cũng mới chơi gà, nhưng mà gọi là nuôi về đam mê. Đấy, anh em là có kinh nghiệm và dày dặn hơn thì có thể chia sẻ vào đây để tôi học hỏi. Tất cả anh em, vừa rồi đấy là tôi gọi là giới thiệu một phần là về chú gà tơ của tôi, với cả giới thiệu về lọ mồi cóc tôi đang dùng cho chú gà tơ của tôi ăn, và cách thức cho ăn thóc hoặc là làm thóc sạch như vừa rồi. Rất cảm ơn anh em đã tìm và xem video của tôi. Hẹn anh em vào video sau, khi nào vần em này hoặc là tôi sẽ nuôi, tôi sẽ quay cho anh em xem hàng ngày em nó sẽ tiến bộ như thế nào. Chào anh em.